Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the starship New Harmony, staring at the massive object floating in the darkness of space. After 3 months of deep space exploration, his crew had found something that should not exist. The alien ship was bigger than anything humans had ever built, stretching almost 2 miles from end to end. Its surface was covered in strange patterns that looked like frozen waves, and it gave off a faint blue light that pulsed like a heartbeat. "Sir, we're getting some weird readings," said Lieutenant Ben Carter from his station. "The ship appears to be dead, but there's still power running through certain sections. It's like someone left the lights on, but went home." Jake nodded and walked closer to the main screen. He had been exploring space for 15 years, but nothing had prepared him for this. The alien vessel looked ancient, older than human civilization itself. Its design was unlike anything in their databases. Where human ships were built for function and efficiency, this ship looked like it was built for beauty. Every curve and line seemed to flow like music frozen in metal. "Any signs of life?" Jake asked. "No life signs, sir," reported communications. "Officer Lisa Wells, but I'm picking up some kind of signal. It's very faint, almost like background noise." "Wait a minute." She adjusted her equipment and frowned. "Sir, this is strange. The signal has a pattern to it. It's not random noise. It sounds almost like ... like music." Dr. Lisa Carter, the ship's chief scientist, looked up from her tablet. She was a small woman with gray hair who had spent her whole life studying alien life forms. "Commander, I recommend we approach carefully. Whatever built this ship had technology far beyond ours. We don't know what we're dealing with." Jake considered. Their options. They were alone in this part of space, light years from the nearest human colony. If something went wrong, no one would come to help them. But this was exactly why they were out here. Humanity had been exploring space for over a century, hoping to find proof that they were not alone in the universe. Now they had found it. "Take U.S. closer," Jake ordered, "but keep our weapons ready and maintain a safe distance." As the New Harmony moved toward the alien ship, Jake thought about his family. His wife Helen was the ship's chief medical officer, and their 16-year-old daughter Amy was part of the civilian research group. This mission was supposed to be routine exploration, mapping new star systems and looking for planets suitable for human colonies. Finding an alien ship was the last thing anyone expected. The closer they got, the more details they could see. The alien ship's hull was covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change in the light. Some sections looked damaged, as if the ship had been through a great battle long ago. But other parts looked perfect, as if they had been built yesterday. "Commander," called out Navigator Pete Williams, "I'm detecting some kind of energy field around the ship. It's not hostile, but it's definitely scanning us. Can you tell what it's doing?" Jake asked. "It seems to be listening to us, sir. Every time someone speaks on the bridge, the energy field changes slightly." Dr. Carter walked over to the communication station. "Lisa, can you play that signal through the speakers? I want to hear what we're dealing with." Lisa Wells pressed a few buttons, and suddenly the bridge was filled with the strangest sound any of them had ever heard. It was definitely music, but unlike any music from Earth. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, with notes that seemed to float in the air like drops of liquid silver. Some parts sounded sad, others hopeful, and all of it felt ancient beyond imagination. "My God," whispered Dr. Carter, "this is incredible. The mathematical complexity of this music is unlike anything I've ever analyzed. It's as if sound itself has been turned into a language." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The music was beautiful, but there was something else about it. It felt alive, as if it was trying to communicate with them. "Can we respond to it somehow?" "We could try playing some Earth music through our communication array," suggested Lisa Wells. If they're using music to communicate, maybe they'll understand our music too. Do it, Jake ordered. Start with something simple. Lisa selected a basic classical piece from their database and transmitted it toward the alien ship. The response was immediate. The alien music changed, becoming more excited and complex. New harmonies joined the original melody, and the energy field around the alien ship began to pulse brighter. "It's working," said Dr. Carter excitedly. "They're responding to our music. This is the first successful communication with an alien species in human history." Down in the civilian quarters, Amy Morrison was practicing her violin when she heard the alien music through the ship's speakers. She had been playing violin since she was 5 years old, and music was as natural to her as breathing. But this alien music was different from anything she had ever heard. It spoke to something deep inside her, something that understood rhythm and melody on a level beyond words. Without thinking, Amy began to play along with the alien music. Her violin found harmonies in the strange melody, adding human emotion to the alien mathematics. She played softly at first, then with growing confidence as she felt the music respond to her playing. On the bridge, the communications equipment suddenly came alive with activity. The alien ship's signal had changed dramatically, becoming warmer and more welcoming. The energy field around the ship began to pulse in rhythm with Amy's violin. "What's happening?" Jake demanded. "Sir, the signal is much stronger now," reported Lisa Wells. "And it's coming from multiple sources on the alien ship. It's like we woke something up." Dr. Carter was staring at her instruments in amazement. "Commander, someone on our ship is playing music that perfectly matches the alien frequency patterns. Whoever it is, they're creating a bridge between our two species." Jake realized who it had to be. "Amy," he said quietly. His daughter had always been gifted with music, but he had never imagined her talent could be the key to first contact with an alien civilization. The alien ship suddenly came alive with lights, patterns flowing across its hull like waves of pure music made visible. What had seemed dead and ancient just minutes before now pulsed with new energy, as if Amy's violin had awakened something that had been sleeping for thousands of years. "Sir," said Lisa Wells, her voice filled with wonder, "they're trying to tell us something. The music is becoming more complex, more detailed. I think they want us to come aboard." Jake looked at the alien ship, now blazing with light and music, and knew that everything was about to change. Humanity was no longer alone in the universe, and somehow his daughter's violin had become the key to unlocking the greatest discovery in human history. Amy Morrison had never felt anything like this before. Her violin seemed to vibrate with its own life as she played along with the alien music. Each note she played was answered by the mysterious ship, creating a conversation that needed no words. She closed her eyes and let the music guide her fingers, feeling a connection that went beyond anything she had ever experienced. Down the hall from Amy's room, her mother Helen was rushing toward the bridge. As the ship's chief medical officer, she had been called to evaluate any potential health risks from the alien contact. But what she heard through the ship's speakers made her stop in the middle of the corridor. The music was beautiful beyond description, and somehow she could hear Amy's violin weaving through it like a golden thread. Helen had taught Amy to play piano when she was very young, and they often played duets together during their free time. She recognized her daughter's musical style immediately, but this was different. Amy was playing with a skill and understanding that seemed impossible for someone her age. On the bridge, Commander Jake Morrison was trying to maintain control of a situation that was rapidly becoming unlike anything in human experience. The alien ship was now fully active, its lights creating patterns that seemed to dance in time with the music. Energy readings showed that whatever power source the aliens used was far beyond human technology. "Dr. Carter, what's your assessment?" Jake asked the chief scientist. Dr. Carter was completely absorbed in her readings. "Commander, this is incredible. The alien ship is responding to Amy's music by activating systems that have been dormant for what appears to be thousands of years. The mathematical complexity of their musical language is extraordinary. They're not just making pretty sounds. They're using music as a form of advanced communication and technology." "Is it safe?" Jake asked. He was proud of his daughter's musical abilities, but he was also responsible for the safety of everyone on the ship. "As far as I can tell, yes," Dr. Carter replied. "The energy signatures are completely non-hostile. In fact, they seem to be trying to welcome us." Captain Helen Morrison arrived on the bridge just as the alien ship began projecting something new. Beams of soft light emerged from various points on the alien vessel, creating three-dimensional images in the space between the two ships. The images were fuzzy at first, but as Amy's violin continued to play, they became clearer and more detailed. "Are those holograms?" asked Navigator Pete Williams. "They appear to be," said Dr. Carter. "But the technology is far more advanced than ours. These images are being created by manipulating light and sound waves in ways we don't understand." Holographic images began to take shape, showing tall, graceful beings with elongated limbs and faces that seemed to be designed for producing complex sounds. Their entire bodies appeared to be musical instruments, with chambers and tubes that could create different tones and harmonies. "My God," whispered Helen. "They're showing us what they looked like." The alien beings in the hologram were clearly the creators of the ship. They moved with fluid grace, and everything they did seemed to involve music in some way. They communicated by singing to each other in harmonies that created visual patterns in the air around them. They built their technology by singing specific frequencies that shaped metal and energy into the forms they needed. "Commander," said Communications Officer Lisa Wells, "I'm getting new signals from the alien ship. The music is becoming more complex, and it's starting to include mathematical formulas and star charts. I think they're trying to tell us their history." As the holographic display continued, the images began to tell a story. The graceful beings, who the crew began calling the Melodians, had once lived on a world where music was the foundation of all life. Every plant, animal, and natural formation on their planet had produced its own unique sounds, creating a global symphony that had lasted for millions of years. The Melodians had built their entire civilization around this musical foundation. They grew their food by singing to plants, traveled by riding sound waves, and even raised their children through musical education that began before birth. Their technology was not built, but sung into existence. But the holographic story took a darker turn. Other images appeared, showing different beings that looked harsh and angular compared to the flowing forms of the Melodians. These new aliens moved in sharp military formations and seemed to hate any form of sound or music. "Those must be their enemies," said Dr. Carter, studying the images carefully. "Look at how the Melodians react to them. They're afraid." The hologram showed great battles where the Melodians tried to defend their musical world using weapons made of pure sound. But their enemies had technologies specifically designed to destroy music and create absolute silence. One by one, the Melodian cities fell silent, their musical towers collapsing into dust. Helen watched the tragic story unfold and felt tears in her eyes. These beautiful beings had been destroyed simply because they loved music. She thought of Amy still playing her violin and keeping the communication alive, and felt a fierce protective instinct rise in her chest. The final images showed the last, Melodians loading themselves into ships like the one they had found. But they were not escaping in the traditional sense. Instead, they were somehow transferring their consciousness, their memories, and their musical knowledge into the ships themselves, hoping that someday another musical species would find them and wake them up. "Commander," said Dr. Carter, her voice filled with awe. "I don't think we're just communicating with a recording or an artificial intelligence. I think we're talking to the actual consciousness of the Melodian species. They're still alive, in a way, inside this ship." As if responding to her words, the alien music suddenly changed again. New voices joined the melody, creating harmonies that were so complex and beautiful that several crew members began to cry without knowing why. The music spoke of loneliness that had lasted for centuries, of hope that had almost died, and of joy at finally finding another species that could understand their language. Amy's violin responded to the new complexity, and she began to play melodies that she had never learned. The music seemed to flow through her directly from the alien consciousness, teaching her their musical language in real time. Helen could not stand it anymore. She ran from the bridge to her quarters and grabbed her portable keyboard. Amy needed help with this incredible responsibility, and Helen was not going to let her daughter face it alone. When Helen arrived at Amy's room, she found her daughter completely absorbed in the music, her eyes closed and her whole body swaying with the rhythm. Without saying a word, Helen set up her keyboard and began to play a simple harmony that supported Amy's more complex violin melodies. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The alien ship's lights blazed brighter than ever, and the holographic images became so clear and detailed that they looked like living beings standing in the room with them. The music from the ship became richer and more emotional, as if the addition of Helen's piano had somehow completed a musical equation that the Melodians had been trying to solve. Back on the bridge, every instrument was going crazy with new readings. The alien ship was powering up systems that had been dormant for millennia, and the energy signatures were unlike anything in human science. "Sir," said Lisa Wells, excitement clear in her voice, "they're trying to teach us something. The musical patterns they're sending are incredibly complex, but they follow mathematical rules that we can understand. It's like they're giving us lessons in how to use music as technology." Jake listened to his daughter's violin and his wife's piano blending with the alien consciousness, and he knew that humanity had just taken its first step into a much larger and more wondrous universe than they had ever imagined. The question now was whether they were ready for what the Melodians wanted to teach them. The music from the alien ship suddenly changed in a way that made everyone on the new harmony stop what they were doing. The beautiful melodies that had been flowing between Amy's violin, Helen's piano, and the Melodian consciousness became more structured, more purposeful. It was no longer just communication. It was a question. Amy felt the change immediately. The music was asking her something, testing her understanding of what the Melodians had been trying to teach. She looked at her mother, who was still playing piano beside her, and saw the same realization in Helen's eyes. On the bridge, Dr. Carter was studying the new musical patterns with growing excitement. "Commander, the Melodians are presenting us with some kind of challenge. The mathematical structure of their music has become much more complex, but it follows patterns that suggest they want us to respond in a specific way." Jake Morrison felt a weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Whatever was happening between his family and the alien consciousness, it was clearly more than just first contact. The Melodians wanted something from humanity, and somehow Amy and Helen had become the key to understanding what that was. The holographic images around the alien ship began to show new scenes. These were not memories of the past, but instructions for the present. The images showed Melodians using their music to accomplish incredible things. They sang to make plants grow faster, hummed to heal injuries, and created complex harmonies that could move objects through space without touching them. "They're showing us how their technology works," said Dr. Carter, her voice filled with wonder. "They don't use machines the way we do. They use music to directly manipulate matter energy." The music from the alien ship became more insistent, and Amy understood that she was expected to try to copy what the holograms were showing. The first test seemed simple enough. The images showed a melodian singing a specific sequence of notes that caused a small object to lift into the air and move in a circle. Amy took a deep breath and tried to play the same sequence on her violin. At first, nothing happened. But as she concentrated on matching not just the notes, but the emotional feeling behind them, she felt something change in the room. A pen that had been lying on her desk began to vibrate slightly. Helen saw what was happening and added her piano to support Amy's attempt. Together, they played the sequence again, this time with more confidence. The pen rose into the air and wobbled there for a few seconds before falling back down. Both women stared at the pen in amazement. They had just used music to move an object, without touching it. The implications were staggering. The alien music responded with what could only be described as approval and encouragement. The next test appeared in the holographic display, showing a more complex sequence that seemed to involve multiple voices working together. "We need more people," Amy said, looking at her mother. "This isn't something we can do alone." Helen nodded and activated her communication device. "Jake, we need volunteers down here. People who can carry a tune. The Melodians are teaching us how to use music as technology, but we need more voices to make it work." Within minutes, several crew members had arrived at Amy's quarters. Engineer Pete Williams brought his guitar. Navigator Kate Johnson had a surprisingly good singing voice. Even Security Chief Roy Adams, who claimed he could not carry a tune in a bucket, was willing to try to help by keeping rhythm. The Melodians seemed pleased by this development. The holographic images became more detailed, showing exactly how different types of sounds and instruments could work together to achieve specific effects. Amy and Helen became the teachers, showing the other crew members how to match their playing to the alien musical patterns. The tests grew more challenging. The next sequence required the human musicians to work together to create a harmony that could generate light without using any electrical equipment. It took them several tries, but eventually they managed to create a soft, glowing ball of light that hovered above their heads for nearly a minute. "This is impossible," muttered Roy Adams, staring at the light they had just created. "Music doesn't work this way." "It does for them," said Amy, gesturing toward the alien ship visible through the window. "They've been doing this for thousands of years. We're just learning their language." The third test was even more impressive. The holographic Melodians showed how to use music to manipulate the flow of energy itself. The human musicians had to work together to redirect power from one system to another, using only their voices and instruments. Dr. Carter, who had come down to observe the tests, was taking measurements with every device she could carry. Energy readings are off the charts," she reported to Commander Morrison over the communication system. "They're actually changing the fundamental properties of matter using sound waves. This technology is centuries ahead of anything we have." The fourth test required them to work together to create a musical field that could protect against radiation. Pete Williams was skeptical until Amy explained that they were not really using music to stop radiation, but using music to tell reality to behave differently in a small area around them. "You mean we're singing to the universe and asking it to change the rules?" Pete asked. "Something like that," Amy replied, though she was not entirely sure she understood it herself. The Melodians don't see music and physics as separate things. For them, everything is part of one big symphony. As they worked through each test, the crew members began to understand that they were not just learning party tricks. The Melodians were teaching them a completely different way of understanding and interacting with the universe. Instead of building machines to accomplish tasks, they could use music to convince matter and energy to do what they needed. The fifth test was the most challenging yet. The holographic images showed multiple Melodians working together to actually bend space around their ship, allowing them to travel vast distances in the blink of an eye. The human musicians would have to create a harmony complex enough to affect the fabric of space-time itself. "I don't think we're ready for that one," said Helen, looking at the incredibly complex musical notation that the aliens were projecting. But Amy was studying the patterns with intense concentration. "Maybe we don't have to do it exactly the way they did," she said slowly. "We're human, not melodian. Maybe we can find our own way to make it work." She began to play a melody that was based on the alien pattern, but included distinctly human elements. Helen joined in with piano accompaniment that added emotional depth to the mathematical precision of the melodian formula. One by one, the other crew members added their own contributions, creating a hybrid music that was neither fully human nor fully alien. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The space around the new harmony began to shimmer and bend, and for a moment everyone felt a strange sensation, as if they were moving at incredible speed while standing perfectly still. "My God," whispered Dr. Carter, staring at her instruments. They actually did it. They created a localized space-time distortion using nothing but music. The alien ship responded with a burst of joyful music that filled the new harmony from end to end. The Melodians were clearly pleased with humanity's progress, but Amy sensed that this was just the beginning. The real tests were still to come. As the music from the alien ship grew more complex and urgent, Amy realized that the Melodians were not just teaching them for fun. They were preparing humanity for something important, something that would require every bit of musical technology they could learn. The question was, what were they being prepared for? The music from the alien ship suddenly turned dark and frightening. Amy felt her violin strings vibrate with a cold fear that made her hands shake. The beautiful melodies that had been teaching them about musical technology were replaced by harsh, discordant sounds that spoke of violence and death. Helen stopped playing her piano and looked at her daughter with concern. "Amy, what's wrong? What are they trying to tell us?" Before Amy could answer, new holographic images appeared around the alien ship. These were not the peaceful scenes of Melodian civilization they had seen before. These images showed war, destruction, and a terror that made everyone watching feel sick to their stomachs. On the bridge, Commander Jake Morrison was studying the new projections with growing alarm. The holographic displays showed vast fleets of dark ships moving through space like a plague of metal locusts. Wherever these ships went, they left only silence and death behind them. "Dr. Carter, what are we looking at?" Jake asked, though he was afraid he already knew the answer. Dr. Carter was pale as she studied the images. "Commander, I think the Melodians are showing us what really happened to their civilization. And I don't think it's just ancient history." The holographic scenes became more detailed and more horrifying. The dark ships belonged to beings that the Melodians called the Silence. These creatures were the opposite of everything the Melodians represented. Where the Melodians created beauty and harmony, the Silence brought only emptiness and death. The images showed the Silence attacking Melodian worlds, not for resources or territory, but simply because they hated the very concept of music and art. They destroyed entire civilizations, just because those civilizations had learned to create beautiful things. Amy continued to play her violin, but now she understood that the alien music was not just sharing history. It was sharing a warning. The Silence were still out there, still destroying any species that developed artistic abilities, and they were coming this way. In her quarters, Amy felt the full weight of what the Melodians were telling her. The beautiful musical technology they had been learning was not just a gift, it was a weapon. The Melodians had survived their destruction by hiding their consciousness in musical ships, but they had been waiting for someone who could not only learn their art, but also defend it. "Mom," Amy said quietly, her violin still singing the alien harmonies, "I think they chose us for a reason. We're not just learning their music, were being trained to fight. Helen understood immediately. Humans were not just musicians. They were also warriors. Throughout their history, humans had fought to protect the things they loved. And now the Melodians were asking them to protect something bigger than any one world or species. The holographic displays began to show more recent events. The silence had been moving through this part of the galaxy for decades, destroying musical species that had never even known they were in danger. Worlds that had just begun to develop art and culture were being wiped out before they could defend themselves. But the images also showed something else. Other ships like the one they had found scattered throughout the galaxy, each one containing the sleeping consciousness of different musical civilizations. The Melodians were not the only species that had chosen to preserve themselves this way. There were others, waiting for someone brave enough to wake them up and unite them against the silence. Commander Morrison made a decision that would change the course of human history. All hands, this is the captain. Report to your battle stations. We may have found our first alien contact, but we've also found our first alien enemy. Down in Amy's quarters, the musical lessons had taken on a new urgency. The Melodians were no longer just teaching the humans how to move objects or create light. They were teaching them how to turn music into weapons, how to use harmony to create shields, and how to coordinate attacks. Using nothing but rhythm and melody, Amy discovered that her violin could do more than just communicate with the alien ship. When she played certain sequences, she could actually control some of the ship's systems. Her music could make the alien vessel move, change direction, and even activate weapons that had been sleeping for thousands of years. Helen found that her piano playing could coordinate multiple ships at once. When she played complex harmonies, the musical patterns could be transmitted to other vessels, allowing entire fleets to move together like dancers in a cosmic ballet. Engineer Pete Williams made an incredible discovery when he connected his guitar to the ship's power systems. His music could actually change how the ship's engines worked, making them faster and more efficient by convincing the laws of physics to behave differently. "This is insane," Pete said, staring at his guitar as if it had turned into a magic wand. "I just made our engines 20% more efficient by playing a blues riff." Navigator Kate Johnson found that her singing voice could affect the ship's sensors and communication systems. When she hummed specific melodies, she could detect objects in space that were normally invisible, and she could send messages across vast distances without using any traditional technology. Even Security Chief Roy Adams, who had always claimed he had no musical ability, discovered that his rhythm keeping could affect the ship's defensive systems. His steady beat could strengthen their shields and coordinate their weapons with deadly precision. As the crew learned more about musical technology, the alien ship continued to show them images of the approaching threat. The silence had detected the awakening of Melodian technology and were moving toward this part of space with a massive fleet designed specifically to destroy musical civilizations. Dr. Carter was working frantically to understand the full scope of what they were facing. "Commander, according to these projections, the silence have been systematically destroying artistic species for millions of years. They see creativity and self-expression as a disease that needs to be eliminated from the universe." The most terrifying part of the revelation was that the silence were not just random destroyers. They had a specific plan and had been working toward it for eons. They wanted to create a universe of perfect order and silence, where nothing existed except cold efficiency and mechanical precision. Amy felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. The Melodians had waited thousands of years to find a species that could learn their musical technology and use it to fight back against the silence. But they had not just been looking for any musical species. They had been looking for warriors who could also create beauty. "They chose humans because we're fighters," Amy said to her mother as they continued to play together. Every other musical species the silence destroyed was peaceful. They didn't know how to fight back, but humans do. Helen nodded, understanding. The full implications. We're not just learning to use music as technology. We're learning to use it as a weapon. And we're going to have to teach other humans to do the same thing. The alien ship's music became more urgent and insistent. Through the complex harmonies, Amy could sense that time was running out. The Silence Fleet was getting closer, and soon. Humanity would face its first test, not just as a musical species, but as the defenders of artistic expression throughout the galaxy. The question was no longer whether humans could learn melodian technology. The question was whether they could learn it fast enough to survive what was coming, and whether they were ready to become the guardians of creativity and beauty in a universe where such things were under attack. Amy looked at her violin and then at her mother's hands on the piano keys. In a few hours or days, these instruments might be the only things standing between civilization and absolute silence. The thought was terrifying, but also strangely exciting. Humanity was about to become something more than they had ever been before. The first warning came from navigator Kate Johnson, whose singing voice had become so connected to the ship's sensors that she could feel disturbances in space before any machine could detect them. She was humming a gentle melody when suddenly her voice cracked with fear. "Commander Morrison," she called over the communication system, her voice shaking. "Something's coming. Something big and terrible. I can feel it in the music." On the bridge, Jake Morrison was already seeing the proof of Kate's warning on his screens. Dozens of dark shapes were emerging from the edge of the star system, moving with mechanical precision toward the new Harmony and the alien ship. The Silence Fleet had found them. Amy felt the change immediately. Her violin strings seemed to turn cold under her fingers, and the music from the Melodian ship became urgent and frightened. Through the alien harmonies, she could sense the approaching. Ships like a growing shadow that threatened to swallow all light and sound. "Mom, they're here," Amy said to Helen, who was still playing piano beside her. "The silence found us." Helen's hands never stopped moving on the piano keys, but her face was grim with determination. "Then we show them what humans can do when someone threatens our music." Dr. Carter was studying the approaching fleet with growing horror. The silence ships were unlike anything in human military doctrine. They were not built for conventional warfare. They were built specifically to destroy music, art, and creativity itself. Their hulls seemed to absorb light and sound, creating dead zones in space where nothing beautiful could exist. "Commander," Dr. Carter reported, "the enemy ships are emitting some kind of dampening field. It's designed to interfere with musical frequencies and prevent artistic expression. They're trying to stop us from using melodian technology." But the silence had made one crucial mistake. They had studied and destroyed peaceful musical civilizations for millions of years, but they had never faced a species that combined artistic ability with military experience. Humans had been fighting wars for thousands of years, and they were about to discover that music could be the most powerful weapon they had ever wielded. Amy stood up from her chair, still playing her violin, and walked to the window where she could see both fleets approaching each other. "Everyone who can make music, get to your instruments. This isn't going to be like any battle in human history." Within minutes, crew members throughout the new Harmony were at their posts with instruments instead of weapons. Engineer Pete Williams had connected his guitar to the ship's power systems. Security Chief Roy Adams was coordinating defensive rhythms from the tactical station. Navigator Kate Johnson was using her voice to track enemy movements and coordinate friendly ships. But Amy and Helen had become something more than musicians. The weeks of training with the Melodians had changed them into conductors of cosmic forces. Amy's violin could now control not just one ship, but multiple vessels at once. Helen's piano could coordinate entire fleets, and make them move together. Like dancers in a deadly ballet, the first exchange of fire was unlike anything in military history. The silence ships launched conventional weapons, but their attacks were met by walls of pure harmony that turned energy beams into gentle light and deflected missiles back toward their senders. Amy played a complex melody that caused the new harmony to dance between enemy attacks like a leaf in the wind. Her violin sang instructions to the ship's engines, making them respond to music instead of computer commands. The ship moved with a grace that no human pilot could have achieved using traditional controls. Helen's piano coordinated the response of 3 other human ships that had arrived as backup. The vessels moved together in perfect formation, their weapons firing in rhythm to create a symphony of destruction that tore through the Silence Fleet's front line. "This is incredible," shouted Pete Williams over the sound of battle and music. "The enemy ships can't predict our movements because we're not following any logical pattern. We're improvising." That was the key difference between human musical warfare and what the Silence expected. Every other musical species they had destroyed had followed precise mathematical patterns in their music. But humans added emotion, creativity, and pure improvisation to their musical technology. Amy began to play a melody she had never heard before, a tune that came from somewhere deep in her human soul. It was a song about home, about protecting the people you love, and about fighting for the right to create beautiful things. Her violin translated these emotions into commands that made their weapons more accurate and their shields stronger. Melodian ship joined the battle with weapons that had been sleeping for thousands of years. Ancient systems came online, powered by Amy's violin and guided by Helen's piano. The alien vessel began to sing its own song of war, a harmony that spoke of civilizations that had been destroyed and a determination to prevent more destruction. But the Silence were not easy enemies. Their ships began to adapt to the musical attacks, creating new forms of dampening fields and silence weapons designed to stop all sound and harmony. Some of their larger vessels could create zones of absolute quiet where no music could exist. At all, they're learning, warned Dr. Carter. The Silence are adapting their tactics to counter our musical technology. Amy felt the enemy adaptation as a pressure against her violin playing, as if something was trying to steal the music from her instrument. But instead of being discouraged, she became angry. These creatures wanted to destroy not just her people, but the very concept of artistic expression. "Kate, sing with me," Amy called to the navigator. "Pete, play something angry. Roy, give me a beat that says we're not giving up." The human crew began to play together in a way they never had before. Instead of following the precise mathematical patterns the melodians had taught them, they began to create their own style of musical warfare. They used human emotions like anger, determination, and love as weapons that the Silence could not understand or counter. Helen added her piano to create a foundation for the other musicians. And suddenly, every human ship in the area was connected by invisible threads of harmony. They moved as one unit, fought as one unit, and created music as one unit. The effect on the battle was immediate and dramatic. The Silence ships, which had been advancing steadily, suddenly found themselves facing attacks they could not predict or defend against. Human ships appeared where the enemy expected empty space, fired weapons that bent the laws of physics, and disappeared into musical dimensions that the Silence could not follow. Captain Steve Mitchell of the human ship Beethoven added percussion to the growing symphony by timing his weapons fire to match the rhythm Amy was creating. Commander Lisa Parker of the Mozart began weaving defensive melodies that protected the entire human fleet from enemy attacks. "This is working," Jake Morrison said with amazement as he watched the enemy fleet begin to retreat. "We're actually winning a space battle using nothing but music." But Amy knew the fight was far from over. Through her connection to the Melodian ship, She could sense other silence fleets moving toward their position. This had been just the first wave, a scouting force sent to test their abilities. The real battle was still coming, and it would require every bit of musical skill that humanity could gather. Amy looked at her violin and realized that she and her mother had become something new in the universe. They were warriors who fought with beauty instead of brutality, defenders who protected creativity and artistic expression against forces that wanted to destroy such things forever. The symphony of war had only just begun. 5 years had passed since the great battle that changed everything. Amy Morrison, now 21, stood at the window of the Harmony Academy and watched as ships from dozens of different species arrived for the annual Festival of Voices. Each vessel moved through space using musical navigation, their hulls singing different melodies that created a symphony visible to anyone who knew how to listen. The victory over the silence had been just the beginning. Word of humanity's musical warfare had spread throughout the galaxy, reaching other hidden ships like the Melodian vessel that had started it all. One by one, sleeping civilizations had awakened, ready to join the fight against those who wanted to destroy artistic expression. Helen Morrison, now director of interspecies musical relations, walked into the observation room where her daughter was watching the arriving ships. At 45, Helen had become one of the most respected figures in the new galactic community. But she still carried the same portable keyboard she had used during that first contact with the Melodians. The crystalline singers just arrived from the Vega system, Helen said, pointing to a ship that looked like it was made of living gemstones. They want to learn how we combine emotion with mathematical precision in our battle songs. Amy smiled, remembering how impossible it had seemed just a few years ago that humans would be teaching alien species about music. And the drum speakers from Proxima? Already in orbit, Helen replied. They're excited to work with Pete Williams on new forms of rhythmic propulsion. Apparently, our idea of using percussion to power starship engines never occurred to them. The Harmony Academy had become the center of a new kind of civilization, built on the principles the Melodians had taught, but expanded with human creativity and determination. It was a place where music and technology were not separate things, but part of one unified approach to understanding the universe. Students from hundreds of different species came here to learn how to use music, not just for communication or art, but for everything from terraforming planets to exploring distant galaxies. The curriculum included traditional subjects like mathematics and physics, but it also required every student to master at least 3 different forms of musical expression. Amy had become the Academy's youngest professor, specializing in what the faculty called combat harmony, the art of using music as both a weapon and a shield. Her classes were always full, not just because she had been one of the first humans to make contact with the Melodians, but because she had developed new techniques that combined human improvisation with alien precision. Any word from the exploration fleets? Amy asked, settling into a chair beside her mother. Helen's expression became more serious. Captain Mitchell's group found 3 more silence bases in the outer rim. They're not giving up easily. But the good news is that we also found 2 more sleeping civilizations. The poets from Andromeda and something called the Color Singers from a system we've never heard of. The war against the silence had evolved into something very different from traditional military conflict. Instead of trying to destroy the enemy completely, the Musical Alliance had focused on awakening more artistic civilizations and teaching them to defend themselves. Every species that joined their cause made the galaxy a little more colorful, a little more creative, and a little more resistant to the forces that wanted to impose silence. And Uniformity.Amy walked over to the wall where her original violin hung in a place of honor. She had several newer instruments now, each one designed to interface with different types of alien technology. But this simple wooden violin had started everything. Sometimes she could hardly believe that first contact with an alien species had begun with her practicing scales in her quarters. "Do you ever miss it?" Helen asked, following her daughter's gaze to the violin. "The simple days when music was just music?" Amy considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. But then I think about all the civilizations that are still alive. Because we learned to fight with beauty instead of just brutality. And I think about all the new kinds of music we've discovered. How could I miss the old days when there's so much more to explore now?" Through the Academy's speakers, they could hear the sound of a practice session in one of the main halls. Human students were learning to sing with the crystalline singers, their voices blending in harmonies that created actual light patterns in the air. The mathematics required were incredibly complex, but the emotional content was purely human: joy, wonder, and the excitement of discovery. "The Council wants us to lead the next exploration mission," Helen said quietly. "They think we're ready to search for the origin point of the silence. If we can find where they came from, we might be able to understand why they hate creativity so much." Amy nodded. She had been expecting this request. The musical alliance had grown strong enough to move from purely defensive actions to active exploration. They wanted to understand their enemy, not just defeat them. "When do we leave?" Amy asked. "Next month. But Amy, this mission will be different from anything we've done before. We'll be going into the heart of silence territory, places where no music has existed for millions of years. It's going to be dangerous." Amy picked up her original violin and drew the bow across the strings. The instrument sang with the same clear, sweet tone it had always had. But now that simple sound could navigate starships, power energy weapons, or communicate with beings from across the galaxy. "Mom, do you remember that piece we used to play together? Beauty and the Beast?" Helen smiled and moved to the piano that sat in one corner of the observation room. "Of course, it was always one of our favorites." Amy began to play the familiar melody, and Helen joined in with the gentle piano accompaniment they had perfected years ago. But now the music was more than just a song. It was a bridge between species, a weapon against those who would destroy beauty, and a symbol of everything the musical alliance stood for. As they played, ships throughout the system began to respond to their music. Lights flickered in rhythm on the crystalline singer vessel. The drum speakers added a soft percussion that could be felt rather than heard. Even the ancient melodeon ship, still orbiting nearby, contributed its voice to the growing symphony. The music they were creating would be transmitted throughout the galaxy, reaching colonies and outposts where humans and aliens worked together to build a universe where creativity and artistic expression were not just tolerated but celebrated. It would reach the front lines where musical warriors stood guard against the silence. And it would reach the sleeping ships that still drifted in dark corners of space, waiting for someone to wake them up and invite them to join the song. Amy and Helen's duet had become the anthem of the new galactic civilization, a promise that no matter how dark the universe might become, there would always be those willing to fight for the right to create beautiful things. As the last notes faded away, Amy looked out at the ships filling the space around the Academy and smiled. Humanity had found its place in the universe, not as conquerors or explorers, but as guardians of the music that made existence worth living. The symphony of the cosmos was just beginning, and everyone was invited to add their voice to the song.